International travel took a huge step forward when the first Boeing 747 Pan Am jet safely made the journey from New York City to London's Heathrow Airport on January 22, 1970. The wide-bodied aircraft was quick, comfortable, and affordable, making a trip across the pond more accessible for many Americans than it had been in previous years. In the spring of 1970, the world anxiously followed the progress of Apollo 13 after it suffered an onboard explosion on the second day of its mission. Fortunately, the astronauts operating the spacecraft made it home safely, and a naval ship was on hand to pick up the three American heroes when they dropped into the South Pacific Ocean. New York City crowds pack a closed-to-cars Fifth Avenue on the first Earth Day, April 22, 1970. Now observed in 141 countries, the holiday was originally intended to bring awareness to environmental causes and oppose ecological degradation. On May 4, 1970, 4 anti-war protesters at Kent State University were shot and killed by members of the Ohio National Guard during a peace rally. 9 other Kent State students were wounded. Here, students flee the scene as tear gas billows around them. In celebration of the 50th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, women across America went on strike on August 26, 1970. The Women's Strike for Equality looked a little bit different in every participating city. But the biggest single event of the day took place in New York City, when some 50,000 women congregated to march down Fifth Avenue. William Masters and Virginia Johnson were just over a decade into their work researching the nature of human sexuality in the spring of 1970. Here, the pioneering duo is photographed at their Reproductive Biology Research Foundation in St. Louis, now called the Masters and Johnson Institute. In one of the more bizarre White House moments of all time, Elvis Presley popped by the Oval Office unannounced on December 1970 to personally offer his services to President Richard Nixon in the war on drugs. According to the Washingtonian, images of the iconic meeting are the most requested items from the National Archives. Muhammad Ali and the Black Panther Party had a close relationship throughout the 70s, though he was never an official member of the movement. Here, the legendary boxer marches with a group of Black Panthers, lending his voice to the fight for fair treatment and equal rights. All in the Family, a sitcom following the lives of the working-class Bunker family, made its debut in early 1971. Before it wrapped in 1979, the series tackled many issues that had never been addressed on TV: racism, women's rights, abortion, and infidelity. 1971, 2 Standard oil tankers collided in the San Francisco Bay, spilling an estimated 500,000 gallons of oil. Local residents jumped in, volunteering their time to help clean the spill, and several environmental organizations, such as the International Bird Rescue, were born as a result. The Congressional Black Caucus, a group focused on championing the causes that most affect Black Americans and aiming to fight for increased equity for Black Americans, was founded in 1971. Here, 12 members sit down to get to work. In October 1971, Soul Train, the iconic black music and dance show, hit the airwaves. Here, Sly and the Family Stone perform on the show to the delight of a packed audience. Troops began leaving Vietnam. The United States' involvement in the Vietnam War had been controversial from the beginning, but it wasn't until the early 1970s that the Senate actively began working against the sitting president to bring troops home. In response, President Richard Nixon started bringing troops home, like this young man, in earnest. Jacques-Yves Cousteau, scientist and host of the popular documentary series The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, poses on board his ship. The oceanographer established the Cousteau Society in 1973 to help protect marine life. Nixon visits China. In 1972, President Richard Nixon became the first sitting president to visit mainland China. His 7-day tour of the communist country has often been hailed as the week that changed the world, thanks to its impact on international politics. Nowadays, massive benefit concerts are almost commonplace, but they were practically unheard of in the 1970s. George Harrison's 1971 concert for Bangladesh is thought to be the first of these celebrity fundraisers. In 2 sold-out performances, Harrison, fellow musician Ravi Shankar, and other guest performers including Ringo Starr, Bob Dylan, and Eric Clapton played to sold-out Madison Square Garden audiences, raising money for East Pakistani refugees fleeing the Bangladesh Liberation War. In 1970, activist and Professor Angela Davis was arrested for her supposed involvement in the armed seizure of Marin County's courthouse in California. She spent 16 months behind bars before being released and acquitted in 1972. Her time in prison helped to shape her future as a staunch prison industrial complex abolitionist. Only men were allowed to participate in the Boston Marathon for the first 76 years of its existence. That all changed in 1972, when 8 female participants were finally allowed to register. The winner, Nina Kushik, on the left wearing F2, finished the race in 3 hours, 10 minutes, and 26 seconds. In an attempt to tamp down some of the tension brought on by the Cold War, President Richard Nixon, seated on the left, and Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev, seated on the right, signed the Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty later in 1972. The pact said that both countries would limit the number of missiles in their arsenals. A group of anti-war protesters burned their draft cards in 1972. Though the form of protest was seen as more symbolic than, say, fleeing the country to live in Canada, it was still illegal as determined by the Draft Card Mutilation Act of 1965. In what would become one of the defining images of the 1972 Munich Olympics, a member of the Black September terrorist group stands on the balcony of the Israeli wrestling team's dormitory. The Palestinian terrorists, calling for the release of prisoners being held in Israeli jails, took 9 members of the country's Olympic team hostage. After 20 hours, 5 of the terrorists, 11 Israelis, and 1 West German police officer would be dead. On Christmas Eve, 1972, astronauts aboard the Apollo 17 took this iconic photo of Earth, later dubbed Blue Marble. The incredibly detailed image would become a component of the official Earth Day flag. David Bowie's alter ego, alien rock star Ziggy Stardust, changed the direction of the music industry. The character, whom Bowie only performed as in 1972 and 1973, practically invented the glam rock genre, and his songs had a huge influence on the melodies and beats used in pop music. When member countries of the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries placed an oil embargo against nations that supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War, bedlam ensued. Gas was difficult to come by and often rationed, and drivers would occasionally be forced to wait in extraordinarily long lines just to fill their tanks. By the end of the OAPEC embargo, gas prices had risen nearly 400% and have never fully gone back down. Hands down, the biggest political story in 1970s America was the Watergate scandal. Here, the two journalists who broke the story, Bob Woodward, left, and Carl Bernstein, pose at their Washington Post desks. The 1970s saw the beginnings of a globalized economy and culture. In 1971, for example, the first McDonald's opened in Japan. While many folks saw moves like this as a way to create more wealth and opportunity, others worried the expansion of American brands endangered local cultures. In 1973, Sachin Littlefeather made history when she became the first Native American to stand on stage at the Academy Awards. The actress and activist was there to refuse an Oscar on behalf of Marlon Brando, who had won Best Actor for his role in The Godfather, and was boycotting the ceremony over Hollywood's treatment and portrayal of Native Americans. The traditionally dressed Littlefeather was booed off stage by unimpressed attendees. Residents of Columbus, Georgia, lined up to receive polio vaccinations in 1973. Thanks to the efforts of the National Polio Immunization Program, polio cases across the country dropped from 20,000 per year in the 1950s to just 10 per year by 1979. The Skylab 3 crew set a record in 1973 when it spent a whopping 59 days and 11 hours in space. The three astronauts flew to Skylab, the first American space station, where they conducted experiments and took photos, including this one of a pocket of helium gas erupting from the sun. In the early weeks of 1974, President Richard Nixon signed a bill into law that lowered the national highway speed limit to 55 miles per hour. The idea was that slower speeds would help save gas and diesel, which, in turn, would take pressure off the ongoing oil shortage. President Bill Clinton repealed the law in 1995, allowing states to set their own speed limits. In 1973, 90 million people tuned in to the Battle of the Sexes tennis match. A 29-year-old Billie Jean King handily defeated 55-year-old Bobby Riggs, who had previously gone on record saying that women's tennis was so inferior to men's tennis that even an older player like him could beat the best women's players. Talk about eating your words. Due to numerous compounding economic factors, the 1970s brought about some of the highest inflation rates in recent history. The purchasing power of a dollar hit a near all-time low, making prices of things like groceries skyrocket. Here, women and children march in New York City, protesting the rising costs of things like milk, bread, and meat. Elton John was one of the busiest artists of the 1970s. Here, he performs at an outdoor concert in England during one of his 8 tours that took place between 1970 and 1974. In the early 70s, actress Marlo Thomas collected several of her celebrity friends, including folks like Cicely Tyson, Michael Jackson, Shel Silverstein, Mel Brooks, and Alan Alda, to help her put together a children's book and a record that challenged traditional gender norms. The project, Free to Be, You and Me, also garnered its own television special that challenged the sexist beliefs that had long been ingrained in our culture. On August 8, 1974, Richard Nixon made a televised appearance in which he resigned from the presidency following the Watergate scandal. He told the people, "I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interest of America first." The following day, he boarded Air Force One, leaving the White House for the last time. He remains the only president in history to resign from office,